In 1826, a frontiersman named Hugh Glass dragged himself nearly 200 miles across the Dakota plains after a grizzly bear left him with a broken leg and a torn back. To stay alive, he relied on raw buffalo liver, foraged berries, and rattlesnake he managed to kill with a stone. By modern medical standards, that kind of diet would raise serious concerns about parasites and infection. Yet Glass survived and went on to live to around 60 years old. And here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. Modern nutritionists now say the mountain men's diet, the one we once dismissed as savage and desperate, may have been one of the most nutrient-dense ways humans have ever eaten. Number 14 on this list was so effective at preventing scurvy that the U.S. Army tried to replicate it and failed. Number 3 involves a preservation method that food scientists at Cornell recently tested and found creates antimicrobial compounds no modern refrigerator can match. These 25 foods kept men alive through Rocky Mountain winters where temperatures dropped to 40 below, through months-long trapping expeditions with no resupply, and across deserts where water was a rumor. The men who ate them were not savages, they were survival engineers operating in the most hostile environment on the continent. Before we start, hit that subscribe button because what you are about to learn might change how you think about food survival and what it actually takes to stay alive when civilization is 1,000 miles behind you. Let us count down the 25 rugged frontier foods mountain men actually ate to stay alive. Number 25, hardtack. That dense, pale cracker baked from flour, water, and nothing else was the backbone of every trapper's possibles bag. Bakers in St. Louis turned out thousands of these 3-inch squares before each trading season, baking them twice to drive out every drop of moisture. The result was a cracker so hard you could chip a tooth on it, but one that would last for years without spoiling. Mountain men carried hardtack wrapped in oilcloth at the bottom of their packs, knowing it might be the only thing between them and starvation when game disappeared in deep winter. A single piece weighed barely an ounce, but delivered around 75 calories of pure starch energy. The trick was soaking it in coffee, broth, or creek water until it softened enough to chew. Some men crumbled it into rendered fat to make a crude porridge. Hardtack was never loved, but it was always there, and in the mountains, reliability meant more than flavor. When everything else ran out, that plain square of twice-baked flour kept men walking. Number 24, pemmican. If there was one food that defined the mountain man's existence, it was pemmican. Native peoples had been making it for centuries before the first trapper crossed the Missouri. Women of the Plains tribes dried buffalo meat in thin strips under the summer sun, then pounded it into shreds with stone tools. They mixed the powdered meat with melted tallow at roughly 1:1, sometimes folding in dried choke cherries or service berries. The result was a dense, greasy cake that packed around 135 calories per ounce and contained complete protein, saturated fat, and enough vitamins to prevent deficiency diseases for months. A single buffalo could yield 40 to 50 laybys of pemmican. Packed into rawhide parfleche bags, it kept for years without refrigeration. Trappers bought it at Rendezvous for about $2 a pound in the 1830s. A steep price when beaver pelts fetched $6 each. But the investment was survival itself. A man could carry a month's worth of calories in a saddlebag. No cooking required, no fire to attract hostile attention. Just cut a chunk, chew, and keep moving. The fur trade itself could not have existed without pemmican. It was the fuel that powered an industry. Number 23, jerked venison. Every mountain man knew how to jerk meat. Deer, elk, or buffalo was sliced thin against the grain, sometimes rubbed with salt if any could be had, and hung over a low, smoky fire built from green willow branches. The smoke kept flies away while the heat dried the meat over 8 to 12 hours. A pound of fresh venison shrank to roughly 4 ahs of jerky, concentrating the protein and fat. Trappers stuffed it into every available pocket. The taste was smoky, salty, and intensely meaty. Not pleasant by modern standards, but deeply satisfying after 10 hours of wading through frozen streams to check beaver traps. Some men added wild sage or juniper berries during the smoking process, creating regional flavors that varied from the Yellowstone country to the Sangre de Cristos. The skill was knowing when to pull the meat off the rack. Too early and it spoiled within days. Too late and it turned to powder in your hands. Number 22nd, roasted buffalo hump. At the annual rendezvous, when thousands of trappers and traders gathered in the Green River Valley or Pierre's Hole, the centerpiece of every feast was the roasted hump of a buffalo cow. The hump ribs, those tall vertebrae between the shoulders padded with thick marbled fat, were considered the finest cut of meat on the frontier. Trappers who had spent months eating nothing but lean rabbit and creek water would weep at the sight of a hump roast turning over an open fire. The fat rendered slowly into the meat while the outside charred and crisped. Jim Bridger himself reportedly said he would trade a good horse for a proper hump roast after a long winter. The flavor was rich, beefy, and deeply satisfying in a way that modern grain-fed cattle cannot replicate. A single hump could feed 8 men and provide enough fat to keep their bodies burning calories through cold mountain nights. The bones were cracked afterward for marrow, and nothing was left behind. Number 21, bone marrow. When a mountain man cracked open a buffalo femur with the back of his hatchet and scooped out the warm, buttery marrow inside, he was eating what modern nutritionists now call a superfood. Bone marrow is roughly 80% fat, loaded with vitamins A, D, and K, and contains compounds that support immune function. Trappers did not know any of this. They just knew that marrow was the richest, most satisfying thing they could eat, and that craving it was their body's way of saying it needed fuel. In deep winter, when game was scarce and every calorie counted, men boiled cracked bones for hours to extract every trace of fat and gelatin. The resulting broth was thick, greasy, and life-sustaining. Some trappers called marrow prairie butter and spread it on hardtack like you would spread jam on toast. Others drank the warm liquid fat straight from the bone, feeling the calories hit their bloodstream almost immediately. Bone marrow was the emergency fund of the frontier diet. When everything else failed, a pile of cracked bones could keep a man alive. First, pattern break. The beaver tail was considered the single greatest delicacy of the Rocky Mountain fur trade. Not the pelt, the tail. That flat, scaly appendage was almost pure fat. Trappers roasted beaver tails directly in the coals of the campfire. The scaly skin blistered and peeled away to reveal a white, gelatinous meat that tasted, according to journals from the era, like the richest pork you have ever eaten. Catholic missionaries actually classified beaver as fish because of its aquatic lifestyle, which meant trappers could eat it during Lent without guilt. Here is what modern food science confirmed. Beaver tail fat is high in omega-3 fatty acids, the same compounds we pay premium prices for in fish oil capsules. The Hudson's Bay Company listed beaver tails as a separate trade item from pelts priced at a premium. We forgot this food existed. The trappers who ate it thrived. Number 19, buffalo tongue. Mountain men prize buffalo tongue above every other cut, and for good reason. The muscle was dense, tender, and marbled with fat that melted during slow roasting over coals. A single tongue weighed between 3 and 5 lbs and could feed 2 hungry mubi, hungry men. The flavor was rich and beefy, with a buttery texture that required no knife. You could tear it apart with your fingers. During the great buffalo hunts of the 1830s, commercial hunters sometimes took only the tongues and left entire carcasses rotting on the plains. Smoked and salted tongues were shipped downriver to St. Louis, where restaurants served them as a luxury item for $2 a plate. Trappers in the field ate them fresh, sometimes raw, and still warm from the kill. The tongue was the first thing cut from any buffalo. If a man rode into camp with a tongue tied to his saddle, everyone knew the hunting had been good. Number 18, Bud. The French-Canadian voyagers introduced this one. Boudin were buffalo intestines cleaned just enough to remove the worst of the contents, then roasted whole over an open fire. The partially digested grass inside gave them a sharp, tangy flavor that trappers either loved or endured. The fat surrounding the intestines crisped as it cooked, and the whole thing was eaten like a sausage. Trappers at Rendezvous reportedly raced to see who could eat the longest, unbroken length. The practice revolted missionaries, but the men understood something their critics did not. Every organ contained nutrients that muscle meat alone could not provide. Buddha delivered B vitamins, iron, and probiotics from the fermented grass. Number 17, parched corn. Before a trapping party left the settlements, each man filled a leather pouch with parched corn. Dried kernels were heated in a skillet with bear grease until they swelled and darkened. A pound of parched corn fit in a coat pocket and delivered over 1,600 calories. Mixed with water, it swelled in the stomach and created fullness. Daniel Boone reportedly carried parched corn on every expedition. It did not spoil. It did not attract animals. It was quiet to eat, a real advantage when moving through contested territory. Number 16, wild onions and camas root. The mountains were not a meat-and-lee diet. Despite what Hollywood tells you, every experienced trapper knew where to find wild onions. Pulling the small bulbs from creek banks across the Rockies. Roasted in campfire ashes, they turned sweet and soft. Camas root was even more important. The bulb of a blue-flowered lily camas was roasted in underground pits for up to 3 days, transforming into something that tasted remarkably like sweet potato. Lewis and Clark's journals record their men eating camas in large quantities, though the sudden fiber intake caused days of digestive misery for men unaccustomed to it. Number 15, rendered bear grease. Every autumn when black bears and grizzlies fattened themselves on berries and salmon before hibernation, mountain men hunted them as much for their fat as for their meat. A large black bear could yield 8 to 10 gallons of rendered grease. Strained through cloth and stored in skin bags or tin containers, bear grease kept for months and served as the all-purpose fat of the frontier. Men fried meat in it, waterproofed their leather with it, greased their rifle patches with it, and rubbed it into their skin to ward off mosquitoes and windburn. Mixed with flour, it made crude biscuits. Spread on hard tack,